Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're zeroing in on something that's really shaking things up across a lot of industries. The 2025 tariffs the U.S. has put on paints and coatings.
Yeah, and it might sound a bit niche, right? But think about,
Right?
well, everything that gets painted or coated. Your car, appliances, big infrastructure.
Yeah.
Tariffs basically import taxes. Well, they send ripples, don't they? Especially now with global supply chains.
Absolutely. And the paints and coatings industry is, well, it's a perfect example. We're digging into a new cognitive market research report just out May 2025 to really, get under the hood.
Hmm.
Our goal today, break down these tariffs, see how they're hitting different parts of the industry, and figure out what companies are doing about it. We want to trace those knock-on effects, maybe spot some long-term changes.
Sounds good.
So let's jump in. What specific tariffs are we actually talking about? Which materials are getting hit the hardest?
Okay, yeah, good place to start. The report, it really flags three key areas. First one, titanium dioxide and pigment concentrates. They're facing a pretty hefty 34% tariff on imports.
Wow, 34%.
Yeah, mainly coming from China and Germany.
Mm.
And titanium dioxide, or TO, that's your basic white pigment, right?
Yeah.
Used everywhere. Architectural paints, industrial coatings.
Right, the foundational white.
Exactly. And the American Coatings Association data, cited in a report, says over 45% of U.S. TO imports, they come from China. So this 34% tariff, well, it could boost raw material costs for U.S. makers by up to 28%.
Up to 28%. That's massive.
It is. And it's not just a number, right? It affects the cost, maybe availability of paint for your walls, coatings, protecting bridges, pretty much everything.
That's a really significant hit. And like you said, not just white paint pigment concentrates give us all the colors, so anyone importing those is feeling it. Okay, what's the second area getting squeezed?
Second is epoxy resins and solvents. Epoxies are crucial for those really tough protective coatings, marine environments, things like that.
Right, the heavy-duty stuff.
Yeah. They've got a 25% universal tariff now. That's a problem for U.S. companies bringing them in from places like South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia.
Okay.
And then solvents. We're seeing 20 to 30% tariff hikes on key ones like ethylene glycol and MIBK.
MIBK, methyl isobutyl ketone.
That's the one. Think of it as a sort of high-performance thinner, helps the paint flow well.
Mm-hmm.
These tariffs, they don't just add cost. They mess with production efficiency, too, how fast things dry and cure.
So hitting performance and manufacturing speed, a double impact there. And the third category?
The third one is additives and specialty chemicals. This is the really specific stuff that gives coatings unique properties.
Like secret sauce.
Kind of, yeah. Rheology modifiers, they control the thickness, how it flows.
Right.
Dispersants, keeping pigments mixed evenly. Anti-foaming agents, get the idea. Tariffs here are around 15 to 20%, hitting imports often coming from the EU and Japan. And the key thing, these are vital for high-spec applications like automotive, aerospace. The report points out there aren't many domestic substitutes ready to go short-term.
Okay, wow. So tariffs hitting a whole range of ingredients. Now, how does this cascade down? How does it affect the different industries actually using these paints and coatings?
Right. It definitely varies. Take architectural coatings. Regular paint for houses, buildings. They're really exposed to those TO Euro tariffs, pigments, solvent-based stuff.
Makes sense.
And for the big guys, like Sherwin-Williams, PPG, it's not just the paint ingredients. They're also seeing costs go up for the cans and drums because of separate steel and aluminum tariffs, plus higher shipping costs.
Ah, the packaging, too. It all adds up.
Exactly. So that puts pressure on prices for builders, contractors, maybe even homeowners eventually. Market research here is looking hard at how much price hikes people will tolerate and whether companies should maybe make more pigments themselves.
A compounding effect, definitely. What about coatings for tougher jobs? Industrial uses?
Industrial and protective coatings, think bridges, pipelines, heavy machinery, they're really feeling the pinch from tariffs on epoxies, corrosion inhibitors, solvents.
And I guess switching isn't easy there.
Much harder. These coatings have really specific performance standards for safety, durability. You can't just swap things out easily. So companies like Axalta, RPM International, they're actively looking at sourcing from places like India or Eastern Europe.
Okay.
Their market research involves really digging into potential new suppliers, watching global resin prices like a hawk, maybe even teaming up on R&D to find alternatives long-term.
Right. You can't compromise on a coating meant to stop, say, a bridge from rusting.
Yeah.
What about the car industry? Huge user of specialized coatings.
Yeah, automotive coatings, the report says they're getting hit twice.
How so?
Well, they've got the tariffs on their pigments and additives, plus they're dealing with the fallout from tariffs on steel, aluminum, even finished cars that the automakers themselves are facing.
Ah, so the pressure comes from both sides.
Exactly. It squeezes the Tier 1 suppliers, and that ripples down to the coating providers, BASF,
Yeah.
Nippon Paint, folks like that. Their strategy involves using things like predictive analytics, trying to guess how car production might shift, maybe to Mexico or Eastern Europe.
And planning accordingly.
Right, and figuring out all the different regulations in those places too. Compliance becomes a huge research focus.
So the coding guys have to be nimble, follow where the car makers go.
Yep.
Now, aerospace and defense, super strict requirements there. How are they coping?
Aerospace and defense.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're using cutting-edge stuff.
Yeah.
Often proprietary formulas, rare additives, corrosion fighters, lots imported from Japan, Germany, China.
Okay.
The report flags cost increases of 25 to 40% on some of those key specialty ingredients. It's huge.
40%.
Yeah. It means longer lead times for materials. It can slow down R&D, and there's massive pressure to find sources closer to home, or at least, not subject to these tariffs.
What are they doing?
They're leaning heavily on market intelligence, trying to find regional players who might be able to supply what they need, looking into licensing tech and doing tons of testing on any alternative materials to make sure they meet those incredibly tough military and federal specs.
It's not just cost, it's performance and safety critical.
Absolutely. I mean, for airlines, a 30% tariff on some crucial additive that could theoretically delay coatings that make planes more fuel efficient, that hits operating costs later on.
Wow. Okay, one more, sector packaging and can coatings. We don't think about it much, but it's everywhere.
Yeah, and they're really caught in the middle.
Oh.
Squeezed by tariffs on the coating materials and tariffs on the metal for the cans, like steel.
Right, steel tariffs we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, already pushing can prices up maybe 15–20%. Then you add the coating costs, especially for food-grade, BPA-free stuff, often imported from the EU or China.
So what's the response?
Companies are looking hard at nearshoring, bringing production closer, investing in R&D for maybe greener, sustainable coating options, and definitely diversifying who they buy from. Market research for them is about running simulations. What if we source from here? How much does it cost? And keeping a very close eye on all the sustainability rules.
It really sounds like these tariffs are causing waves across pretty much every single part of the paints and coatings world. The report really stresses China's role in all this. Why is China so central?
That's a crucial point. China isn't just sending out finished paints. It's a massive global supplier of the basic ingredients, pigments, resins, solvents, additives. Crucial stuff.
Okay.
And its influence goes beyond direct U.S.-China trade, because lots of other countries the U.S. buys from Germany, South Korea, India, they also rely on intermediate chemicals from China.
Ah, so it's indirect effects too.
Exactly. So tariffs on Chinese goods or the inputs they use, the price pressure spreads. Let's take TO Euro. Maybe a U.S. paint company buys it from Germany. Fine. But maybe that German supplier gets a key raw material for that TO, something that gives it its specific brightness, say from a Chinese factory that's now facing tariffs.
And those costs get passed along.
Right down the chain. It ripples out. Makes it harder for U.S. manufacturers to keep their formulas consistent, manage costs, make sure everything meets regulations. It's complicated.
Yeah, that really shows how tangled these global chemical supply chains are. So how's all this hitting the manufacturers directly, the supply side?
Well, the report basically describes squeezed profits and stretched out timelines. For companies here and globally, this industry works under tight rules, right? Performance standards are key. Even tiny changes in an additive's quality or how well a pigment is mixed, it can seriously affect how long the coating lasts, how fast it dries, if it's environmentally safe.
So consistency is critical.
Super critical. And many companies, especially in industrial and automotive, are saying their input costs are up 12 to 20%. Epoxies, acrylic emulsions, specialty solvents, especially things linked back to China, directly or indirectly, those have seen the biggest jumps.
That must be putting serious pressure on their margins.
Oh, absolutely. And the tariffs are really highlighting how much the industry came to rely on, well, cheaper Chinese formulations and raw materials.
So they're trying to find alternatives.
They are. Looking at Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, but it's not always simple. Those places might not have the sheer production capacity, or maybe the quality standards aren't quite the same or consistently met.
Hurdles to overcome.
Definitely. Plus, switching means retraining workers, dealing with different environmental rules, maybe long waits for approvals if you have to reformulate coatings.
Which leads to delays.
Yeah, the report mentions delays in launching new products, unpredictable lead times for getting essential materials. That's a huge headache for sectors like automotive OEM coatings or marine coatings, where timing and quality are absolutely everything. It's like dominoes falling through the whole system.
It sounds like an incredibly complex situation, which I guess is where market research really comes into its own. How is it helping companies deal with all this?
Absolutely essential. I mean, with tariffs changing, shortages popping up, geopolitical friction, market research isn't just a nice to have anymore. It's become like a core strategic tool.
Oh, so?
It gives companies the intel they need
Yeah.
to spot where they're vulnerable, figure out if switching suppliers is actually feasible, and make smart calls on product design, balancing cost, performance, regulations.
Can you give some concrete examples? How is it being used right now?
Okay, yeah. One big one is supplier mapping and diversification. Research helps companies build detailed maps. Who are the potential suppliers? Where are they? What's their capacity?
Looking beyond the usual suspects.
Exactly. Evaluating alternatives in places like, say, Brazil, Poland, Indonesia, looking at their capacity, sure, but also do they meet environmental standards?
Yeah.
Like REACH in Europe or EPA rules here.
Right. Compliance is key.
Totally. Research helps estimate lead times, figure out trade deals, assess shipping risks. It's all about reducing dependency on those tariff-heavy countries, like China, but doing it without messing up your paint formula. Data-driven decisions.
That makes sense. Understand the options first. What else is research critical for?
Another big one. Raw material cost modeling and forecasting trends.
Predicting prices.
Trying to, continuously tracking prices for key stuff. Pigments like iron oxides, tioberos, solvents like xylene, MEK, those specialty additives we talked about. Then building models based on energy costs, shipping rates, new regulations
To see what's coming.
to get ahead of it. It helps procurement teams adjust strategy. Maybe buy in bulk now if prices look like they'll spike later because of, I don't know, shipping bottlenecks somewhere.
Yeah.
Proactive buying.
That foresight must be incredibly valuable for planning. What about the actual paints and coatings? Product development.
Yeah, product reformulation and regulatory intelligence. That's huge, too. Tariffs make some ingredients expensive, right? So research helps find potentially cheaper alternatives that still perform.
Performance is key, though.
Always. So it's about technical benchmarking, assessing substitutes. Can we re-engineer this architectural paint, this floor coating maybe, to use something different but still meet the specs and the rules?
And keeping up with the rules.
Crucial. Tracking environmental regulations everywhere, VOC limits, sustainability certificates. You have to comply to sell.
So it's finding substitutes that work and are illegal. What about the customers? How does research help understand their reaction?
Good point. Demand analysis and channel optimization. If prices go up because of tariffs, how do buyers react? Especially in DIY or decorative paints where people are more price sensitive.
Do they switch brands? Buy less?
Research tries to figure that out, analyzing retail trends, talking to contractors. Maybe mid-range buyers start choosing cheaper store brands, so a big brand might react by, bundling services or offering different performance tiers to keep people loyal across different price points or shops.
Adapting the offering based on customer behavior makes sense. And finally, long-term strategy, big picture planning.
Yeah, that's where scenario planning comes in. Strategic foresight. Basically using research to run what-if simulations.
Like wargaming trade policy.
Sort of. What if tariffs get worse on pigments? What if the EU tightens chemical rules impacting our imports? How does that hit our inventory, our costs, our compliance?
Thinking ahead.
Right. It helps companies build backup plans, maybe renegotiate supplier contracts, or even decide, okay, maybe we need to invest in making this stuff locally. Building resilience.
It really sounds like market research is the navigation system for companies in this storm. So given all this and the research insights, what are companies actually doing? What are the strategic moves?
Well, the report shows it's not just one thing, it's a multi-pronged response. The big players, PPG, Sherwin-Williams, Axalta, they're putting more money, faster, into regional sourcing hubs.
Whereabouts?
Places like India, Eastern Europe, Mexico, trying to shorten supply lines, reduce reliance on China. We're also seeing more vertical integration. Companies buying or partnering up with chemical producers in those regions to get more control over their essential raw materials, make themselves less vulnerable to shocks.
Securing the supply chain from closer to the source. What about smaller firms? They can't always buy chemical plants.
Right. Smaller, maybe more specialized companies, they're leaning more on tech. Digital tools for buying materials, better inventory tracking, using analytics, using AI to forecast demand more accurately.
Using data to be smarter, more agile.
Exactly. Better visibility, faster decisions, And we're also seeing more collaboration companies working with material innovators to develop bio-based alternatives or coatings using recycled content.
Ah, the sustainability angle, too.
Yeah, it tackles the tariff issue potentially, and it boosts their green credentials, which matters more and more. So ultimately, the winners seem to be the ones who are agile, use data really well, smart sourcing, smart reformulation, resilient distribution.
Well, being proactive, informed, flexible, that seems key. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. A real deep dive into how these 2025 tariffs are hitting paints and coatings.
Hmm.
To sum up, I mean, it's clear these tariffs are a major challenge. They're forcing big strategic changes. That old reliance on complex global supply chains, especially involving China, that's definitely being rethought.
Absolutely. And as we've discussed, market research is just fundamental now. It's the critical tool for navigating all this complexity, guiding decisions on sourcing, R&D, forecasting, long-term strategy, everything.
And it's fascinating to hear what the proactive steps, regional hubs, vertical integration, new materials R&D, it really shows the industry's resilience, its ability to adapt.
It does. And it leaves us with a thought, maybe for you, our listener. If tariffs and geopolitics are reshaping this industrial supply chain, how might similar pressures be affecting other sectors you follow? What are the bigger picture implications for global trade, for manufacturing, as companies everywhere try to find that new balance between cost, resilience, and these tricky geopolitical factors? Definitely something complex to think about.